Hey everyone, and welcome to Rambling Reviews, where we analyze different types of media and or their cultural relevance. My name is Christian, and this is Batman in Detective Comics number 27. Now, before we get into this, of course, Batman is one of the most famous superheroes, of all time. I mean, second to none. It's like, you look at the most popular superheroes, it's Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. But, Batman's right up there on, the Mount Rushmore of superheroes, if you will. And with that in mind, the Batman and this story especially and everything was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Now, Bill Finger, quite honestly, is the one who really did most of the creation for Batman. Bob Kane kind of took all the credit due to a shady contract deal, but to put it in perspective, this was Batman as drawn originally by Bob Kane. Basically, as the story goes, he showed Bill Finger his idea for Batman, and Bill Finger cleaned up the whole thing and made him into what we know him as today. But, like I said, Bob Kane took all the credit, and for years, Bob Kane, we'll see at the end here, that his signature was signed at the end of every comic. You would see in movies and adaptations of Batman of all sorts that would say Batman created by Bob Kane or something of that nature. And it was so bad that apparently Bob Kane would have a bunch of different artists draw for him, and he'd have ghostwriters. He would tell people, oh yeah, I'm the guy that made Batman. I'm the guy that and people would ask him to draw Batman, on a napkin at a restaurant or something, and he couldn't do it. But he took all the credit, and Bill Finger didn't get any of the recognition, fame, or, from my understanding, the financial accolades that he deserved for creating such an iconic character. I touched on this a little bit with Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, although in that case it wasn't nearly as egregious as this. In the case of the creation of Spider-Man, it was more so that Stan Lee kind of holds to the idea, or held to the idea, rest in peace, that the idea of Spider-Man was more important than the drawing. I think you have to have both. I mean, yes, the idea and the character and everything is very important, but you have to, if you don't have the drawing of the character, you just have an idea. So, but in the case of Bob Kane and Bill Finger, I mean, it was a much more different, much more hostile situation. And Bill Finger is essentially the guy that made, all of the Batman mythos. I mean, according to Comic Vine, he basically created all of the characters, Batman, Robin, Batgirl, Batwoman, Clayface, a ton of the villains, pretty much every, even Joker, even smaller villains like Killer Moth, Kite Man of all characters, basically the entire mythos, and the person we really have to thank for everything regarding Batman really is Bill Finger and not Bob Kane, although he didn't even really start getting credit legally for Batman until 2016. Like I said, it was a really shady business deal that he went in with a contract with Bob Kane. But with all of that out of the way, I do, of course, want to get into now the actual story of Batman's first appearance here. As we open with a silhouette of Batman, hyphenated here, against the night sky, where it, basically just kind of gives a little introduction of Batman, as we have the case of the Chemical Syndicate. And you can see right here, we have Batman by Bob Kane. No mention of Bill Finger. That's the last. That's probably not the last time I'm going to bring it up. I think it's just really egregious and probably one of the greatest crimes in comic, maybe even all of, entertainment, history, if you will. Getting into the story proper, we have Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon just kind of hanging out, smoking. This was the 30s that this was written. Smoking even indoors and, on pipes and all these different things is very common. But I think it's really interesting to look at the fact of how Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne were clearly friends at the beginning here. Like, from the inception of Batman, the concept of, or from the very first appearance of Batman, the concept of Batman and Bruce Wayne being friends with Commissioner Gordon was always there. But as the two are hanging out, just kind of shooting the shit, the Commissioner Gordon gets a call to investigate a murder, and he invites Bruce along with him. I don't know if this is a thing back then, but apparently it was okay to just invite random, regular civilians onto a case, and they're off to investigate a murder. Bruce is like, oh, well, I guess not. I'm not really up to anything special, so sure, why not? There are several moments in this issue where he says, ho hum, and it's, it's very clear that, so throughout so much of this issue, you're really kind of meant to be thrown off. You're kind of figuring out multiple mysteries here. One, you're going to be figuring out who committed the murder. You're also trying to figure out who this mysterious Batman character is, because, modern audiences today, we all know Bruce Wayne is Batman. Spoilers, I'm sorry. But for those that, were reading this at the time, you're reading this and you don't know who Batman is. Like, you don't know what this character is. Batman was very much based off of characters like Sherlock Holmes, The Shadow, which was a character we're probably going to take a look at sometime down the road. But, this whole issue is set up where the reader is expected to, and the reader didn't, of course, know who Batman even was, because why would they? So as Bruce and Gordon arrive on the scene, they find an old man by the name of Theodore Lambert. Now, Gordon, before even arriving on the case here, was told that a knife was found which killed Theodore, belonging to Theodore's son, Mel Lambert. So he's here, of course, to investigate the situation. So Gordon goes to confront, as the issue constantly refers to him as, young Lambert, and the guy basically tells him, I'm innocent. I know my fingerprints were found on here, but it has nothing to do with with me. I found the blade in his back, and as I was as I took the blade out and I was trying to save him, he died in my arms. All he could do was talk about this contract. I don't even really know what he was talking about, but that's essentially how that goes. And as he continues on, of course, Gordon continues asking him. He's like, well, did your dad have any enemies? And he says, well, no, not really, except, well, there were his 3 old business partners. There was Stephen Crane, Paul Rogers, and Alfred Stryker. And now we have our suspects. Essentially, these are now the people that we're going to narrow down and see who's going to be, the killer. Understand that the first issue of Batman, like the first Batman appearance, and especially a lot of the early issues of, that involved Batman at all, the early Batman stories, were mystery. They weren't, like, superhero wasn't really a thing that much, back then, but Batman stories were very much mystery. They were very Sherlock Holmes inspired and stuff like that. So just as Gordon's getting this information, he gets a phone call, and it's Stephen Crane himself, telling him that, and now we have Bruce at this point taking his chance to leave, where he's basically like, all right, well, I'll leave you to, finish the rest of the work. I'm going home. Again, no idea as to why it's okay for a cop to bring a, regular civilian on a police case in the first place, but, he takes his leave. And again, this is really the writer, I think, kind of playing with the expectations of the reader, thinking like, all right, here's this, like, kind of loser aristocrat guy who doesn't really know anything. He's just kind of a liability. Maybe they think he's here for comic relief. I'm not really sure what the average reader would have thought of, Bruce Wayne at the time here. But, in any case, meanwhile, at this moment, Stephen Crane is in fact murdered, and the murderer gets away with a piece of paper. Now, we're not let known what this piece of paper is, but keep it in mind because it will come up later here. Again, I think it's really important to look at how all of this stuff was done in such a way that is, this is a detective story first and foremost. We're seeing the pieces and the clues, and as the reader, you're meant to, be kind of piecing this all together and figure out what's going on. So, we're having these little things piece by piece. And again, the reader at this point wouldn't know who Batman is. And speaking of which, we finally have our introduction to the titular character as the two goons are trying to get away and they come across Batman here to stop him, or as they call him again, the Batman, again hyphenated, which I'm really not sure as to why they ever dropped the hyphenation, later in the years, but in any case, they did. Batman makes quick work of the two goons, gathers the paper, and at this point, Batman is figuring out what's going on. Gordon arrives and speaks to who I can only imagine is Stephen Crane's butler, as he basically tells Gordon, he's like, it's horrible. Mr. Crane was murdered, and Gordon starts piecing everything together. Now Batman has an important piece of paper which for him spells everything out. Again, the reader doesn't really know what's going on, but now Batman knows what's going on, and Gordon's piecing things together. I think Gordon is kind of meant to be your kind of the stand-in for the reader here for this first appearance of Batman, kind of like what Watson was to Sherlock Holmes in Sherlock Holmes. Again, heavy inspiration from Sherlock Holmes here. But, Gordon pieces together, he's like, okay, well, that's 2 out of the 4 gone, so, whoever's killing these guys off is still going to be going after Paul and Alfred. We gotta, really deal with this and figure out what's going on. But again, Batman kind of knows what's up, as we see him, they make a moment to mention that a small smile comes across his face because he's figured it out, and he speeds off to deal with the situation. And I want to point this out because we have not the Batmobile, but just a regular car that he's driving. The Batmobile and much of Batman's early stuff didn't actually exist for a good while in a lot of the early comics. When we get to that, of course, we'll get to that, and it'll be very satisfying when we do. But for the time being, expect a lot of rudimentary things like this. But what's interesting, I think, about this is you get to see the beginnings of concepts like the Batmobile and stuff like that. So, we'll see that continue more as we move on here. With everything that's been happening, Paul Rogers now finally decides to, kind of run to Stryker and let him know what's up, and he's kind of being like, those of us that are being, that are involved with this company, Apex Chemicals, we're being killed left and right. Like, what's going on? Do you know anything about this? And they're like, yeah, come in. He speaks to Stryker's assistant, and he's like, yeah, come in. To where he knocks him out and ties him up. And I think we're meant to be misled here because as I'm rereading this, I'm noticing that this isn't Stryker, this is his assistant. As he's tying him up, telling him how once you're out of the way, I got one more to take care of, and then I'll control everything. So, we're kind of led to think as the readers here, all right, is he taking down, is he going to be going after, his boss, Paul next? Like, what's up? This is the guy who's behind everything, so it would seem. Now, as Paul is tied up here, the plan is to have this lid go over him in a gas chamber, which Stryker's assistant says he uses to kill lab rats, or guinea pigs rather, and it's meant to kill him. Remember, this was written in 1939. As far as I understand it, with the Holocaust, the gas chambers didn't actually start until 1942, so toward the end of the Holocaust, or yeah. But the latter half of it, if you will. So that's just an interesting thing because, like, reading it as a modern audience, like I look at it and I'm like, oh, like, I don't know about you guys, but like I hear gas chamber and I think Holocaust, So that wasn't really so much of a thing, but I mean, it was happening, unfortunately, but like, it wasn't associated specifically with Nazis and Holocaust back then. So, I think it would be very different today if they were to do something like that. Maybe nowadays it would be more okay, but it was definitely a time period where that kind of plot thread I don't think would have flown. But what's very important here is we have Batman show up, and we have this important moment where he grabs a wrench on his way. This is a Batman that, again, this is very early in the character's mythos. He doesn't have his batarangs. He doesn't have the Batmobile. He doesn't have any of these things. He's very resourceful, and he still has the motif of Batman and things of that nature. However, except he's got like purple gloves and stuff like that. But in general, this is in a lot of ways the Batman we know today. But he doesn't have all his tools and gadgets and stuff. So instead of using anything like he would these days from his utility belt, he just grabs a wrench, gets under the dome, real quick, and is able to use a handkerchief, which apparently he carries with him, and use the wrench to stop the gas from coming out, and then breaks the glass with the wrench. With Batman and Paul free, the assistant shows back up and is just absolutely shocked that that they've survived this. Batman comes face to face with the assistant as he takes him down, and everyone now thinks all is well. We now have Alfred Stryker himself show up. Stryker is like, well, what happened? And Paul says, your assistant tried to kill me. To which he's like, oh, so he didn't finish the job, huh? So Stryker goes after Rogers and attempts to kill him, saying how once he's done, he's going to kill him and throw him in the acid bath below, the acid tank, rather. And Batman, of course, quickly stops him and explains to both of them everything that happened. So this is where we get into the really detective elements here. A lot of the early stories of Batman are going to be where a character, in this case Rogers, is like, I don't understand, why did he try to kill me? What's going on? And Batman has pieced everything together and now tells the reader what happened, why all this happened. So basically, Lambert, Crane, Rogers, and Stryker were all part owners of Apex Chemicals, but Stryker wanted to be the sole owner. He didn't have enough capital for this, though, and as such, created a contract between all of them. He then decided to have the rest of them killed off so he wouldn't have to pay his part and could take sole ownership as he originally wanted. So ultimately, it's greed and capitalism that were, the reasons for all of this. So Rogers is all like, well, that's all well and good, but how did you even figure this out? Batman's like, well, I got one of his contracts. What we saw earlier, where he got a piece of paper from one of the goons that he had taken out, was in fact the contract, or at least a contract, from one of the people that he hired, or one of the... So I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure if it's meant to be a contract that Stryker had written for them, for the people that committed his murders for him, or if it was one of the contracts written between the four people. I'm thinking it was a contract written between the four people. And we have all these that must be what it is. But again, we have all these moments throughout the story where, like, we had Lambert Sr., as he was dying, he was, mentioning the contract. We had all these bits and pieces of information being put out here. And again, it really is a detective story. A lot of Batman's early issues are very much like that. As Stryker's called out on his crime, he's like, yeah, that's right, I did it, but you're not going to send me to the chair for it, which I guess is like the main thing that would have happened if he committed a murder. It was just straight to the death penalty, which, I mean, okay, fair dues, I suppose. In any case, he makes one last attempt to try to, get away. Batman gives him a good left hook, and Stryker falls into the pit of acid he was originally going to use to dispose of Rogers. And I want to point this out here. This is Batman's first appearance. We all know Batman doesn't kill. But in his first issue and a lot of his early appearances, Batman absolutely kills. He makes no qualms about the situation. And Rogers even points out, oh, he's falling, and Batman just lets him go. As he falls, Batman just turns to Rogers and he's like, a fitting end for his kind. And I mean, like, damn, it is, but it's, wild to think how this character who is known for having such a strong moral code and that main thing being not to kill, because he can't cross that line or anything, well, he had no problem with it in the early beginnings of the Batman mythos, if you will. But from a moment that is very uncharacteristic of Batman these days, we go to a very iconic thing that Batman still does today, where Rogers is saying something, he's like, oh, how can I ever thank you? And as he does, Batman's gone out the window. It really is interesting to see how many aspects of the character are, that we know today that are so integral to the character today existed even back then. I mean, it's just really impressive. As we wrap up the story, we have Gordon explaining everything to Bruce, and Bruce is just like, that's a very interesting fairy tale you're telling me, but he's just not believing a word of it. And Gordon just kind of mentions to himself, Bruce must have such a boring life. And again, we have all these moments here where I really think that the reader is not supposed to know that Bruce is Batman, because we end on these panels here where we kind of close up on this door and we reveal that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Again, this was meant to be like a crazy thing, I think, for the reader. It's just, it's one of those things. It's kind of like how nowadays we can't watch Star Wars Episode 5 and not know that, or even Episode 4 and not think like, oh, that's Luke's father and that's Luke's sister, which makes some of the early moments with Luke and Leia, ooh, but we'll get to that when we get to that. It's just really interesting to think, like, how did the average reader with this look at this and see, because you and me, like, we all know Bruce Wayne is Batman, like, obviously, right? And yet, clearly, in the early issue here, it's just as much a mystery who Batman is as who committed these crimes. So, it's just very interesting to look at that and to see the reality of that situation. But in any case, we do have, again, that little signature of Bob Kane, with, again, no credit to Bill Finger. So, lovely. But I think it's really interesting just how much of this first issue of Batman, this first appearance of Batman in Detective Comics, really, really sets up the character, and so many aspects of him that we know to this day exist. I mean, the design is, of course, has barely changed at all, which, I mean, what, don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? At the same time, though, we also see like the friendship between Bruce and the commissioner. Commissioner Gordon. We see his detective skills. We see him kind of playing a more aloof, billionaire playboy kind of guy. We have all these different aspects of his character. Just more and more. We don't have the Batmobile, but we do have the just a car that he uses. We don't have him using gadgets, but we do have him using being resourceful and using tools around him. We have, all these different moments. We have the iconic thing where he leaves without even saying goodbye to the person he saved and helped, and all these different things. Really, the only big thing that's jarring and isn't accurate to the character as we know him today is that he kills. Early Batman, Golden Age Batman kills a lot. This Batman doesn't. Excuse me. This Batman does. Batman, as we know him, these days, doesn't. But he very much does here. So, in any case, I think this is just an incredibly good issue and an incredible introduction to the character of Batman and his mythos and everything. And it's not hard to see, similar to the first issue with Spider-Man there. And this will be true when we look at like so many other characters and franchises and such. They really hit the ground running, and I mean it's incredible. So, in any case, and as always, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. Follow me on social media for more. Subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date. Leave a like if you like, and if not, I hope you find something you do like. Later, guys. Peace and love.